My mind felt like it was floating, disconnected from my body as if it had been severed from the physical world and left adrift in a void. Slowly, like a rising tide, awareness returned to me, trickling in with flashes of memory, fragments of the Reptilian patrol, the blinding lights, and the overwhelming strength that had pinned me down. My body was stiff, restrained, but I couldn't yet open my eyes. Lena's voice, soft but strained, broke through the fog.
Dr. Cole, Ethan, can you hear me?
The mention of my name snapped something into place, and my eyes shot open. My vision blurred momentarily, adjusting to the sterile, harsh lighting that filled the room. Cold, clinical. Everything was made of sleek, metal-like surfaces, but none that I could immediately recognize. The walls gleamed with a glassy sheen, reflecting a subtle glow that pulsed from thin strips of light embedded in the ceiling. I turned my head toward the sound of Lena's voice. She sat a few feet away, slumped against the wall, her wrists shackled in front of her just like mine. Her face was pale, streaked with dried blood from a cut near her temple. She was trying to free herself from the metallic restraints around her wrists, but with no success. "Lena," I croaked, my throat dry and raw. "Where are we?"
I don't know. One minute we were in the village, and the next, I remember those reptilians grabbing us, and then nothing.
I tried to sit up, only to realize that I was also shackled, my arms held tightly by the cold metal. I glanced around the room, my scientist's mind kicking in automatically, assessing our environment. The cell was large but stark, every surface gleaming with a sterile, almost alien cleanliness. One wall wasn't a wall at all, but a transparent barrier that acted like glass, though I doubted it was anything so primitive. Beyond it, I could see a hallway illuminated by that same harsh lighting. Every now and then, strange spherical drones, about the size of a basketball, floated past, scanning the hallway with beams of light that swept from left to right, searching for any signs of disturbance.
We need to get out of here. What if they've already...
"We're not dead yet," I said, trying to sound calm, though my heart was hammering in my chest. If they wanted us dead, they would have killed us back in the village.
Then what do they want with us?
I don't know, but we need to figure it out. I shifted my body, testing the strength of the restraints around my wrists. They were firm, and the material was cold to the touch, but it wasn't metallic. It was something else, something smoother. And when I tugged at it, the band seemed to hum slightly, like a living thing. Lena noticed it too.
What is this, some kind of material?
I squinted at the bands. Nanotechnology, maybe? Something that responds to pressure? But it's unlike anything I've ever seen. My scientific curiosity surged through the fog of fear, momentarily taking over. I began to study the room with more interest. The transparent barrier intrigued me. It wasn't glass, but it looked like it had the properties of glass. Clear, smooth, yet strangely resilient. My gaze drifted outside the barrier again, and for the first time I noticed that we weren't the only ones trapped. Figures moved beyond the glass, some human, others with the pale green skin of the people we had encountered in the village. They were being led down the hallway in single file, their heads bowed, their eyes hollow. Occasionally one would be pulled out of the line and escorted through a door I couldn't see. But what disturbed me most was how they moved, like they were lifeless, their bodies shuffling as if they were barely conscious. Lena's eyes followed mine, widening.
What are they doing to them?
I don't know, though the hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end. But it looks like they're being processed.
Processed? What does that even mean?
I don't know, I repeated, more to myself than to her. We both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our situation pressing down on us. My thoughts raced, flipping between panic and logic. Where was Sarah? Was she in another cell, or had she been taken somewhere else? And if she had, what were they doing to her?
Sarah.
Lena whispered, echoing my thoughts.
Do you think she's alive?
I hesitated, not wanting to vocalize my own fear. I hope so.
But what if she's...
Don't, I said sharply, cutting her off. Don't go there. Not yet. Lena fell silent, her eyes filled with worry and exhaustion. Suddenly a voice, low and raspy, cut through the silence. It came from the cell next to ours, though I couldn't see the speaker.
You're wasting your time. The Reptilians don't care about your struggles. The moment they bring you in, you're theirs.
Lena and I exchanged a glance, startled. Who's there? I called out. A figure moved into view on the other side of the transparent barrier between cells. It was an older man, his skin pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken. His wrists were bound in the same way ours were, and there was a haunted look in his eyes.
You're new here,
he said, almost as if it were a fact, not a question. Who are you? I asked, leaning forward as much as my restraints would allow.
It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is what they're going to do to you. You won't survive the interrogation.
Lena's face paled. What interrogation? The man's expression darkened.
They'll take you soon, one by one. They'll use their machines to dig into your mind, pull out your deepest memories, your darkest secrets. You won't be able to resist it. None of us can.
I felt a cold dread creep down my spine. Mind control?
Worse than that.
The man said quietly.
They can rewrite your mind, erase everything you know. And when they're done with you, you'll be like them.
He gestured toward the figures being led down the hallway.
Empty, hollow. You'll become part of their machine.
Lena's breath hitched, her eyes widening in fear.
No, they wouldn't.
Believe me, they will.
The man said, his voice tinged with bitterness.
They've done it to everyone here.
I shook my head, trying to keep my grip on rational thought. There must be a way to escape.
Escape?
The man gave a bitter laugh.
There's no escape. You're in their world now. No one escapes.
Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Lena stiffened. A group of reptilian guards appeared, their tall, imposing figures moving with mechanical precision. One of them approached a neighboring cell, where a woman was sitting, her head bowed. Without a word, the reptilian pressed a panel on the wall, and the barrier around her cell vanished. Two guards grabbed her by the arms, pulling her to her feet. She didn't resist. She didn't even scream. She was completely numb, devoid of any fight. But as they dragged her away, her lifeless eyes briefly met mine, and I saw the flicker of something in them. Fear, desperation. But it was too late. The guards disappeared down the hallway with her, the sound of their footsteps fading into the distance. Lena's hands were shaking.
Did you see that? Did you?
Her voice was cut off by the distant sound of a scream. It was sharp, filled with agony. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. The man in the next cell spoke again, his voice lower now.
That's what happens when they take you for processing. Once you're gone, you're never the same again.
Lena looked at me, her face pale.
What do we do, Ethan? What if they take us next? What if we don't make it out?
I wished I had an answer, but the truth was, I didn't know. I had no idea what we were up against, or how we could fight back. My mind raced with 1,000 possible escape plans, but each one seemed more futile than the last. We'll find a way, I said finally, though my voice lacked conviction. We'll figure something out. Lena didn't look convinced, and frankly, neither was I. But before we could say anything more, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway again, this time stopping directly in front of our cell. I looked up, my heart pounding, as a pair of reptilian guards appeared outside the transparent barrier, their eyes cold and calculating. Without a word, one of them pressed a panel on the wall, and the barrier separating us from the hallway disappeared. The other guard stepped inside, towering over us with a menacing presence. "Get up," he growled in a guttural voice. Lena and I exchanged a terrified glance. It was our turn. I couldn't breathe. My feet stumbled over the cold, metallic floor as the reptilian guard shoved me forward, the hard grip of his hand like iron clamped around my arm. My mind raced, the tension building with every step as we approached the looming door, at the end of the long, sterile corridor. I glanced to the side, but Lena was no longer beside me. They had separated us as soon as we left the cell. I could still hear the echoes of Lena's panicked breathing when they had dragged her in the opposite direction. My heart pounded against my ribs, the dread twisting tighter around my chest. "Where are you taking her?" I demanded, but the guards didn't bother to answer. The hallway stretched on forever, the bright lights reflecting off the smooth, gleaming walls. My eyes darted around, catching brief glimpses of other captives through the translucent barriers lining the corridor. Human, green-skinned, all broken, empty, and lost. The door ahead slid open with a cold hiss, and the reptilian guard practically threw me inside. I stumbled forward and caught myself on a steel chair bolted to the floor. The room was small, barren, and terrifyingly cold. So cold that my breath misted in the air in front of me. A thick, glass-like wall stretched across the far side of the room, revealing a control station on the other side, where I could make out vague, shadowy figures monitoring the room's activity. Without a word, the reptilian pushed me into the chair and strapped my arms and legs to it. The restraints tightened painfully around my wrists and ankles. I was trapped. My head spun as I tried to make sense of everything. Where was Lena? What had they done to her? And what were they planning to do to me? The reptilian guard loomed over me, his yellow eyes cold and unblinking as he inspected the restraints. His skin, mottled and rough like a snake's, caught the light from the overhead bulbs, making him look even more alien than I could have imagined. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He didn't respond. Suddenly, a loud hum filled the room, and I felt something shift in the air. I looked up to see that the glass-like wall had changed, revealing more of the shadowy figures beyond. This time, I could make out 3 distinct figures standing in the control room. One of them stepped closer to the glass. My breath caught in my throat. It was Sarah. My heart dropped into my stomach. She was alive, but that relief was quickly washed away by a surge of confusion. She was standing with the reptilians, dressed in a sleek, dark uniform that I had never seen her wear before. Her face was expressionless, cold, almost as if she didn't recognize me. "Sarah," I gasped, my voice cracking. Her eyes met mine, but there was no recognition there, just the same cold indifference that I had seen in the reptilians. "Sarah, what the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking. She didn't answer. Instead, one of the reptilians in the control room leaned closer to her and whispered something in her ear. She nodded mechanically and stepped toward the glass, her gaze still fixed on me. I felt a rush of anger and disbelief. "You're working with them?" "Sarah, why? We trusted you." The room felt like it was closing in on me. My breath quickened, my chest tightening with a flood of emotions. Fear, anger, betrayal. It all swirled together in a chaotic storm inside me. Sarah stepped closer, her face still devoid of emotion.
"Ethan,
She said finally, her voice calm, almost soothing.
you don't understand. I had no choice."
"No choice? What do you mean, no choice?" I snapped, struggling against the restraints. "We trusted you. You were with us."
They know everything, Ethan. They've known for a long time about NASA, about the Stargate, about the project.
A cold shiver ran down my spine. Lena had been right. The reptilians knew far more than we ever imagined. It was as if they had been watching us, monitoring us, this entire time. "They know about the Stargate?" I repeated, my voice barely more than a whisper. How? How could they possibly know? Sarah glanced at the reptilian next to her, who nodded in approval. Then she turned back to me, her eyes hardening.
You were never alone, Ethan. The controllers have been watching you for years. They knew about the project before you even began.
I stared at her, my mind reeling. That's impossible. We worked in complete secrecy. No one outside of NASA knew about it.
You were wrong.
Sarah said simply, her voice icy.
Everything you've done, everything you've worked for, was orchestrated by them. They wanted to understand how the human mind in Area 51 could evolve. They monitored you, your project, your failures, your breakthroughs. They let you believe you were in control, but you never were.
The room tilted around me. I felt like I was drowning in disbelief. This can't be real.
It's real. The controllers have been waiting for you to open the Stargate. They knew it was only a matter of time before you succeeded. You've triggered something bigger than you realize.
Lena's words from earlier echoed in my mind. How do they know all of this? It was impossible. It didn't make any sense.
And now,
Sarah added coldly.
they want to know more.
My heart pounded in my chest as I processed her words. The Reptilians, no, the controllers. They had been behind everything. They had let us stumble around in the dark, playing with technology we didn't fully understand, only to pull the strings when it suited them. Sarah, I whispered, my voice hoarse with desperation, you don't have to do this. You're one of us. You can still help us. But Sarah's face remained emotionless.
It's too late for that. There's no escaping them, not for me, not for you.
Before I could respond, the hum of machinery filled the room once again, louder this time. I felt something clamp down around my head, a cold metallic band that I hadn't noticed before. It hummed with energy, and I could feel it vibrating against my skull. What is this? I gasped, struggling against the restraints. Sarah watched me with detached indifference.
This is where they learn everything.
A flash of bright light exploded behind my eyes, and suddenly, I was no longer in the sterile room. I was in my childhood home, my father's study. The familiar scent of old books and leather filled my senses, and I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Everything felt so vivid, so real. But it wasn't real. I knew it wasn't. And yet, standing in front of me, leaning over the desk with a warm smile, was my father. He looked just as he had before he died, strong, confident, his eyes filled with wisdom. "Ethan," he said, his voice gentle, "it's good to see you, son." My heart clenched painfully in my chest. My father. God, it had been years since I'd heard his voice. He looked so real, so alive. "Dad?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "It's okay," he said, stepping around the desk to stand in front of me. "You don't need to fight anymore, son. Just let go. Let them help you." I blinked rapidly, trying to shake the illusion, but it was so real. I could feel the warmth of the room, hear the crackle of the fire in the hearth. "Let them help you," my father repeated, his voice soft and comforting. "You've done enough. It's time to let go." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, this isn't real. You're not real." But his hand reached out, warm and solid, resting on my shoulder. "It's all right, Ethan. You've done your part. You don't have to fight anymore." I felt myself wavering, my mind splitting between the real and the illusion. It was so tempting to believe him, to give in to the warmth and comfort of his presence. But deep down, I knew it was a lie. This wasn't my father. This was the Reptilians. They were playing with my mind. "No," I shouted, wrenching myself away from the illusion. The warmth of the study vanished in an instant, replaced by the cold, sterile reality of the interrogation room. My head throbbed painfully, and I gasped for breath, feeling the metal band hum against my skull. Sarah watched me with an unreadable expression, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something almost human. Before I could say anything, the door to the interrogation room slid open, and another Reptilian guard stepped inside. "Take him back to his cell." The guard's voice echoed in my mind, and I understood every word. As the restraints around my arms and legs were released, I slumped forward, my body weak and trembling. The reptilian guard hauled me to my feet and dragged me toward the door. But just before we reached the exit, I glanced back at Sarah one last time. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why are you doing this?" She didn't answer. The door slid shut behind me with a cold hiss, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the unbearable weight of betrayal. I was dragged down the hallway, my body barely able to keep up with the reptilian guard's harsh pace. My legs felt weak, like jelly, and my mind was reeling from what I had just experienced. The image of my father was still fresh in my head, vivid and warm, as if I could still hear his voice echoing through my mind. But it wasn't real. It couldn't have been real. Just let go. No, I couldn't. There was too much at stake, too many unanswered questions, too many dangers that lay ahead. And Sarah, God, Sarah, was she really working with them? Or was this some kind of elaborate manipulation? I could hardly believe it, but there she was, cold and distant, standing side by side with the reptilians like one of them. Why would she betray us like this? The reptilian guard gave my arm a violent yank, snapping me out of my spiraling thoughts. I glanced up, the cold lights reflecting off the smooth walls, giving the hallway an eerie glow. The air was frigid, sterile. Somewhere far off I could hear the faint hum of machinery, and every so often the soft whoosh of doors opening and closing in the distance. We passed by several cells, each one filled with captives, some human, some green-skinned. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions lifeless, and as we moved past, I couldn't help but wonder how long they'd been here. Had they undergone the same interrogation, the same manipulation? Were they already lost, their minds broken by the reptilians? I clenched my fists, trying to push away the rising fear. I'm not like them, I told myself. I'll find a way out of this. But every step I took, every second that passed, brought me deeper into the belly of the beast, deeper into whatever hellish fate awaited us. Suddenly the guard came to an abrupt stop in front of a door, its sleek surface gleaming under the harsh light. Without a word, the guard pressed his hand against a panel on the wall, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. I was shoved inside, the door closing behind me with a finality that made my stomach churn. The room was small, cold, and clinical. It was similar to the one I had been interrogated in, but there was something different about this one, something more ominous. A metallic chair sat in the center of the room, equipped with restraints for both the arms and legs. Overhead, strange machines and monitors lined the ceiling, their screens flickering with symbols and data that I couldn't decipher. The walls were bare, save for the glass-like panel that separated this room from the control station on the other side. And there, seated on a raised platform behind the glass, were two reptilian figures, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard as the guard shoved me toward the chair. "Sit," he commanded, his voice a guttural growl. Reluctantly, I lowered myself into the chair, the cold metal biting into my skin. The restraints automatically snapped into place around my wrists and ankles, locking me in. I was trapped. Again. The guard stepped back, watching me with those cold, reptilian eyes, before turning to leave the room. The door slid shut behind him, and I was left alone. Alone with the cold silence, the flashing screens, and the eerie presence of the reptilian overseers behind the glass. I tried to steady my breathing, to think clearly. There had to be a way out of this. But the truth was, I had no idea what they were going to do to me next. They had already dug into my mind, pulled out pieces of my past, used it against me. What more could they want? I was about to find out. Without warning, the monitors above me flickered to life. Strange symbols and patterns flashed across the screens, and a low hum filled the room. I felt a sudden pressure on my head, and then nothing. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the cold, sterile room anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere familiar. I stood in the middle of a vast open field, the sky overhead a brilliant shade of blue. The sun shone brightly, casting warm rays over the tall grass that swayed gently in the breeze. Birds chirped in the distance, and the sweet smell of wildflowers filled the air. I knew this place. I had been here before. It was the field behind my childhood home. For a moment I stood there, frozen, taking in the scene. It was so real, so vivid. I could feel the warmth of the sun on my skin, the soft rustle of the wind in the grass. Everything about it felt real, but it wasn't real. I knew that. This was the Reptilians' doing, another mind game. But even as I tried to ground myself in reality, something inside me wavered. It was so tempting to believe, to give in to the illusion, to lose myself in the comfort of the past. As I stood there, staring out at the horizon, I heard a voice behind me, a voice that sent a jolt of shock through my entire body. Ethan. I turned around slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Standing there, just a few feet away from me, was my father. His dark hair was flecked with gray, just as I remembered, and his eyes held that same warm, knowing expression that had always made me feel safe. He smiled at me, a soft, gentle smile, the kind that made me feel like everything was going to be okay. "Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling. He took a step closer, his hands outstretched, as if inviting me into an embrace. "It's me, son." "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "No, you're not real. You're not—" "Ethan," he said again, his voice soft and soothing. "I know you're scared. I know you don't understand what's happening. But you don't have to fight anymore. It's okay to let go." I took a step back, my mind reeling. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. My father had been dead for years, but the way he looked at me, the way he spoke, it was so convincing, so real. "I'm not giving up," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not letting them win." My father smiled again, a sad, knowing smile. "You don't have to fight them, Ethan. They're not your enemy. They're trying to help you. All you have to do is trust them." I shook my head violently. No, this is a lie. You're not my father. You're just a figment of my mind, something they created to manipulate me." "Ethan," he said softly, stepping closer. "It's okay. I'm here. You don't have to be afraid." "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Stop it!" But he kept coming closer, his arms outstretched, his eyes filled with that same warm, loving expression. I stumbled back, my heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "I'm not giving up," I repeated, more to myself than to him. "I'm not giving up." He stopped just a few feet away from me, his expression softening. "I'm proud of you, son. You've done so much. But it's time to let go. It's time to come home." The tears welled up in my eyes, unbidden and unwanted. I tried to blink them away, but they wouldn't stop. My chest heaved with the effort of holding back the sobs that threatened to break free. But I couldn't give in. I wouldn't give in. "Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. "I miss you. God, I miss you so much." "I know," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "I miss you too, Ethan." "I can't," I choked, my throat tight with emotion. "I can't let them win." He smiled again, that same sad smile. "It's okay. You've done your part. Now it's time to rest." I closed my eyes, fighting against the wave of emotion that surged through me. It would be so easy to give in, to let go and fall into the comforting embrace of my father. But deep down, I knew that this wasn't real. It was just another trick, another manipulation. "I'm not giving up," I said again, my voice stronger this time. "I'm not letting them win." When I opened my eyes, my father was gone. The warmth of the sun vanished, replaced by the cold, sterile air of the interrogation room. My body jerked as I came back to reality, my heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was still strapped to the chair, the restraints digging into my wrists and ankles. The metal band around my head hummed faintly, sending a dull throb of pain through my skull. But I had resisted. I hadn't given in. The reptilian figures behind the glass watched me with cold, calculating eyes. One of them leaned closer to the control panel, his scaled fingers dancing over the buttons and levers. The door slid open, and the guard who had brought me here stepped inside. His eyes glinted with something dark, something that made my skin crawl. "Take him back to his cell," one of the reptilians behind the glass commanded in a low, guttural voice. The guard grabbed me by the arm and yanked me to my feet, my legs barely able to support my weight. My mind was still reeling from the illusion, the emotional manipulation, the vividness of my father's voice. As the guard dragged me toward the door, I cast one last glance at the reptilians behind the glass. Their cold, unfeeling eyes met mine, and in that moment I knew I had only scratched the surface of what they were capable of. The real battle had just begun. The cold, metallic floor scraped against my cheek as I was dragged down the corridor, my body limp and battered. My mind struggled to focus, still reeling from the psychological torment I'd just endured. The illusion of my father, so real, so tangible, echoed in my thoughts, pulling at the seams of my sanity. But I couldn't afford to let myself fall apart. I had to stay grounded. I had to stay focused. They'd tried to break me in that room, digging into my memories, playing with my emotions, twisting my past to make me compliant. But I hadn't given in, and I wouldn't. The reptilian guard's grip on my arm was like iron, his taloned fingers digging into my skin as he dragged me along the dimly lit corridor. The lights overhead flickered, casting an eerie glow on the glass-like walls that lined the passage. My legs barely functioned, and every step felt like a monumental effort. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to get back to Lena. I had to find her. She was the only thing tethering me to reality, the only thing reminding me why I had to fight. The door to the cell came into view, the translucent surface reflecting the pale light from above. Without a word, the reptilian guard shoved me inside, the door sliding shut behind me with a soft hiss. I stumbled forward, my knees giving out beneath me as I collapsed to the cold floor. Pain shot up my legs, but it was nothing compared to the overwhelming sense of disorientation clouding my mind. For a moment, I just lay there, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to push through the fog that clung to my consciousness. And then I heard her.
Mom, is that you?
Lena's voice was soft, trembling and completely out of place. My heart sank as I forced myself to sit up, my eyes searching the small cell for her. She was sitting in the far corner, her back against the wall, her knees drawn up to her chest. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, staring at something that wasn't there. Her hands trembled as she reached out toward the empty space in front of her, her lips moving in a whisper.
Mom, I didn't mean to leave you. I'm sorry.
My stomach twisted into a knot as I realized what was happening. They had gotten to her too. They had broken into her mind, twisted her memories, manipulated her deepest fears and desires. "Lena," I whispered, my voice hoarse as I crawled toward her. "Lena, it's me, it's Ethan." She didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the empty space in front of her, her hands trembling as she reached out, as though she were trying to grasp something invisible.
Mom, please. Please don't leave me again.
My heart shattered at the sound of her voice. I reached out and gently placed my hand on her shoulder, trying to shake her out of whatever hellish illusion they'd trapped her in. "Lena, it's not real," I said softly, my voice trembling. "Whatever you're seeing, it's not real. I'm here. You're safe." She flinched at my touch, pulling away from me as though I was some kind of ghost. Her eyes darted around the room, wild and unfocused, as she whispered to herself.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to leave you, Mom. I didn't.
Her words trailed off, her voice breaking with a sob. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest, directed not at her, but at the monsters who had done this to her, who had manipulated her mind, twisted her memories, and left her broken and confused. I clenched my fists, trying to push down the rage, trying to stay focused on the one thing that mattered right now, getting her back. "Lena," I said again, more firmly this time as I moved closer to her. "It's me, Ethan. I'm here. You're not alone." For a moment, she didn't respond. Her eyes remained distant, her mind trapped in whatever illusion the reptilians had forced on her. But slowly, so slowly, her gaze began to shift. She blinked, her brow furrowing as though she was struggling to understand where she was.
Ethan?
"Yes," I said, relief flooding my chest as I reached for her hand. "I'm here. You're safe." She blinked again, her eyes slowly focusing on me.
I saw my mom.
Tears welled up in her eyes, and I could see the devastation etched across her face. She looked so lost, so broken. My heart ached for her, but I didn't know how to comfort her. How could I? We were trapped in a cell, at the mercy of beings far beyond our comprehension, and her mind had just been torn apart by memories that weren't real. "They made you see her," I said softly, squeezing her hand. "It wasn't real, Lena. It was just another one of their tricks. You have to fight it." Her lips trembled as she nodded, her tears spilling down her cheeks.
I miss her so much.
"I know," I whispered, my own voice thick with emotion. "But we can't let them win. We have to stay strong." She sniffed, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand.
What do they want from us, Ethan? Why are they doing this?
"I don't know," I admitted, the weight of that uncertainty pressing down on me. "But whatever it is, we can't let them break us." For a long moment, we just sat there in silence, the cold reality of our situation settling over us like a heavy fog. I could still hear the faint hum of machinery outside the cell, the soft whoosh of doors opening and closing in the distance. Every now and then, a distant scream would echo through the hallway, the sound sending chills down my spine. Lena leaned her head against my shoulder, her body trembling with exhaustion.
Do you think Sarah is okay?
The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know how to answer that. After everything we had seen, after the way Sarah had appeared to be working with the Reptilians, I didn't know what to think. I didn't know who to trust anymore. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "I really don't know what to say to you, but Sarah isn't on our side right now."
What do you mean?
Then, without warning, the sound of gunfire shattered the stillness. Lena jerked upright, her eyes wide with fear.
What was that?
I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing as I strained to listen. More gunshots echoed through the corridor, followed by the unmistakable sound of screams. Screams that chilled my blood, like something straight out of hell itself. The noise was getting closer, the sound of chaos, of destruction. "What the hell is going on out there?" I muttered, my voice tight with fear. Before either of us could move, the door to our cell slid open with a hiss. Lena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as a figure stepped through the doorway. It was Sarah. But something was different about her. She wasn't wearing the cold, detached expression she had in the control room. Her eyes were wide with urgency, and her face was pale, her skin slick with sweat. She looked terrified. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice laced with disbelief. She didn't say anything. She just rushed toward us, her fingers flying over a small device she held in her hand. For a moment, I thought she was going to attack us, but then a faint hum filled the air, and I felt a strange shift in the atmosphere. A swirling, shimmering portal materialized in the center of the room, its surface rippling like liquid glass. The sight of it made my stomach flip. The Stargate, Lena whispered, her eyes wide with shock. I stared at the portal, my heart racing. How the hell had she opened it? And why?
Get up!
Sarah ordered, her voice trembling with urgency.
We don't have much time.
What the hell is going on? I demanded, my mind spinning with questions. How did you...
There's no time to explain.
She snapped, her voice rising in panic.
If we don't leave now, we're all dead.
I could hear the gunshots getting closer, the screams growing louder. Whatever was happening out there, it wasn't going to stop. And if Sarah had found a way to get us out, I wasn't going to argue. Come on, I said, grabbing Lena's hand and pulling her to her feet. Sarah stepped toward the portal, her face pale but determined. Stay close to me. I can't hold it open for long. I didn't need to be told twice. Together, the three of us rushed toward the swirling Stargate, the sound of chaos and destruction echoing behind us. The air around the portal crackled with energy, the light from its surface casting strange, shifting shadows across the cell walls. I hesitated for a split second, my heart racing as I stared into the shimmering surface of the portal. We had no idea where it would take us, no idea what waited for us on the other side, but staying here was certain death. Lena squeezed my hand, her voice trembling.
Ethan.
I know, I whispered, my breath catching in my throat. We have to go. Without another word, we stepped forward, the portal swallowing us in a flash of light. The sensation of being pulled through the Stargate was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was like being stretched, twisted, and folded all at once, my body and mind torn apart and reassembled in a fraction of a second. The light was blinding, the sound a deafening roar, and for a moment I wasn't sure if I was still alive. But then, just as quickly as it had started, the sensation stopped. I staggered forward, gasping for breath as the world around me snapped back into focus. The cold, sterile air of the Reptilian facility was gone, replaced by the familiar sights and sounds of the village. The green-skinned villagers moved about in the distance, their eyes wide with shock as they watched us appear out of thin air. We made it, Lena whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. We're back. I turned to Sarah, who was standing beside me, her face pale and exhausted. She looked like she had aged a decade in the last few minutes, her shoulders slumped with the weight of whatever burden she was carrying. But there was no time for relief, no time to celebrate, because somewhere, deep inside the Reptilian facility, the controllers were already regrouping, and they weren't going to stop until they found us. The village was quiet, unnervingly so. The green-skinned villagers went about their lives with a somber, mechanical routine, as if they had long accepted the weight of their oppression. The air was heavy with tension, and the remnants of the night's terror still clung to the wind. Lena and I stood by a small fire, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The warmth of the flames barely touched the cold knot of anxiety lodged in my chest. Behind us, Sarah sat on a low stone bench, her face pale and drawn, her eyes fixed on the ground as though she was staring at something only she could see. She hadn't said much since we'd escaped through the Stargate, and I hadn't pressed her. Not yet. But the questions burned in my mind. Why had she helped us? Why now, after everything she had done? And more importantly, could we trust her? I glanced at Lena, who was sitting next to me, still recovering from the psychological torture the Reptilians had inflicted on her. She had been quiet ever since we'd arrived back at the village, her mind clearly struggling to process the illusions they had forced on her. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, but how could I? I didn't even know if we'd make it out of this alive. The fire crackled softly, and the tension in the air finally became too much to bear. "Sarah," I said, my voice low and steady, "we need to talk." She didn't look up, but I saw her shoulders tense. She knew this was coming. She had to. For a moment she didn't speak, just stared at the ground as though she were gathering her thoughts. Then with a deep breath, she finally lifted her head and met my gaze.
I know what you're thinking, Ethan. You think I betrayed you.
I crossed my arms, my jaw clenched. You stood there with them, Sarah. You watched while they tortured us, while they tore our minds apart. How am I supposed to see that as anything other than betrayal? Her eyes flickered with pain, and she looked away.
You don't understand. I didn't have a choice.
Didn't have a choice? I repeated, my voice rising. You always have a choice, Sarah. Her gaze snapped back to mine, and for the first time since we'd returned to the village, I saw a flicker of anger in her eyes.
Do you have any idea what it's like to be trapped here? To be hunted every day for 5 years? I've been stuck in this hellhole, trying to find a way out, trying to survive. And you just arrived. You have no idea what it's like.
Lena shifted uncomfortably next to me, glancing between Sarah and me. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the uncertainty about what to think. I wasn't sure what to think either. So what? I asked, my voice hard. You decided to work with the Reptilians? You just gave up? Sarah shook her head, her eyes flashing with frustration.
I didn't give up. I was trying to survive. I was this close to getting back to Earth. They promised me a way out. If I could help them with the Stargate, they said they'd let me return to Area 51.
I felt my anger rising, boiling under the surface. And you believed them? You really thought the Reptilians would just let you go? She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She had been desperate, clinging to any hope, no matter how slim or dangerous. And in that desperation, she had made choices that had led to her standing alongside the very creatures that had tormented us.
I know it sounds stupid, but I didn't see any other way. I've been trapped here for years, Ethan. Every day I watch people die, watch them suffer. I just wanted to go home.
Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd only been in this hell for a few days, but Sarah had been here for 5 years. 5 years of isolation, fear, and desperation. I couldn't imagine what that had done to her, what kind of mental and emotional scars she carried.
But that's not all, is it?
Lena asked suddenly, her voice soft but steady.
You didn't just want to go back. You wanted to help the green race too, didn't you?
Sarah's eyes flicked toward Lena, surprise flashing across her face. For a moment she didn't say anything, but then she let out a long breath and nodded.
Yes, that's part of it too.
She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, her hands clasped tightly together.
The Reptilians control everything here. The green race, they're slaves, trapped in these villages, working for the Reptilians, barely surviving. I thought if I could help the Reptilians, maybe I could find a way to help the green race too. I thought maybe I could turn the tables on them.
I furrowed my brow, trying to make sense of what she was saying. So, you wanted to steal the Stargate and use it against them? Sarah nodded, her face etched with guilt.
I figured if I could get my hands on the Stargate, I could use it to destabilize the Reptilians' control and return to Earth. I could have gone back, our Earth, because it only had one shot, and after that, it wouldn't work. But when I saw you two in that facility, when I saw what they were doing to you...
Her voice cracked and she looked down at her hands.
I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. I had to help you.
The weight of her words settled over us like a thick blanket, and for a moment, none of us spoke. I could see the turmoil in Sarah's eyes, the pain and regret that had been building up inside her for years. She had made terrible choices, but she had also been trapped, just like us. Lena spoke first, her voice soft but steady.
Sarah, we understand. You were doing what you thought you had to do to survive.
Sarah's eyes flickered with surprise.
You're not angry?
I'm not saying I agree with everything you did, but I understand why you did it. And right now, we need each other. The Reptilians are after all of us.
Sarah let out a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping with relief.
Thank you.
I crossed my arms, still feeling the tension in my chest. But I knew Lena was right. We couldn't afford to hold grudges. Not here, not now. We had bigger problems to deal with. We need to focus on the green race, I said finally. We need to help them fight back against the Reptilians.
There's a resistance. It's small, and they've been keeping to the shadows, but they're there. They've been planning an uprising for years, but they need help. They need people who know how to fight, who can think strategically.
Lena glanced at me, her eyes filled with determination.
We can help them. We've seen the Reptilians' technology up close. We know how they operate.
Sarah stood up, her face set with resolve.
Then we need to get out of this village. The Reptilians will come looking for us, and it's only a matter of time before they find us. There's a tunnel system that the Resistance has been using. It runs beneath the villages and connects to the cities. If we can reach it, we can hide there and plan our next move.
Lena and I stood as well, the firelight casting long shadows across the ground. Then let's go. We've got a revolution to plan. The village had grown eerily quiet as we prepared to leave. The green-skinned villagers moved about with nervous energy, their eyes flicking toward the sky as though they expected the Reptilians to descend at any moment. I could feel the tension in the air, the fear that had taken root in these people after years of oppression. Sarah led us through the narrow streets, her movements quick and purposeful. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, her eyes scanning the darkened alleys and shadowy corners for any signs of danger.
Where's this tunnel?
Lena asked, her voice hushed as we walked.
It's hidden beneath one of the old storage houses. The Reptilians don't know about it. At least not yet. The Resistance has been using it to move supplies and people in and out of the villages for years.
I glanced around the village, my heart pounding in my chest. Every shadow seemed to hold the threat of discovery. Every rustle of the wind sent a shiver down my spine. We couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. Finally, we reached a small, dilapidated building at the edge of the village. It looked abandoned, the wooden planks of the walls rotting and splintered, the roof sagging in the middle. Sarah led us inside, pushing open the door with a creak. The interior was dark, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and dust.
Here,
she whispered, kneeling down and pulling aside a section of the floorboards. Beneath the boards was a narrow stone staircase leading down into the darkness. A faint breeze drifted up from the tunnel, cool and damp, carrying with it the scent of earth and stone. Lena hesitated for a moment, her eyes wide as she stared into the dark tunnel.
How far does it go?
Far enough. It connects to a network of tunnels that run beneath the Reptilian cities. We'll be safe there, at least for a while.
I nodded, stepping forward and descending the staircase. The walls of the tunnel were damp, the stone cold beneath my fingers as I reached out to steady myself. The air grew cooler the farther we went, the sound of our footsteps echoing softly in the narrow passage. We moved in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. Every now and then, I would glance back at Sarah, wondering if she was leading us to safety or into another trap. But as we reached a wide, open cavern deep beneath the ground, I saw the flicker of torchlight ahead, and a sense of hope stirred in my chest. The resistance was real, and we were about to meet them. The flickering torchlight cast long, wavering shadows along the damp stone walls of the cavern. The cold underground air filled my lungs as I stepped into the wide open space beneath the earth, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. Lena and Sarah followed closely behind me, their footsteps echoing softly in the vast tunnel. The cavern was much larger than I had expected. It stretched far beyond what I could see, the walls disappearing into the shadows. Rough-hewn pillars of stone supported the ceiling, and small clusters of green-skinned villagers huddled near the flickering torches, their faces drawn and pale. These were the people of the Resistance, the ones who had been hiding in the shadows for years, waiting for their moment to strike back against the Reptilians. But as I looked around, I realized just how few of them there were. Maybe a couple dozen at most. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions weary, their clothes torn and ragged. These weren't soldiers, they were survivors, and they looked broken. Sarah moved ahead of us, her movements quick and purposeful, as if she were familiar with the place. She nodded to a few of the villagers as she passed, and they nodded back, their faces showing a flicker of recognition. It was clear that she had been here before, that she had worked with these people, even while pretending to collaborate with the Reptilians. Lena glanced around the cavern, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and uncertainty.
This is the Resistance?
Sarah stopped and turned to face us, her expression serious.
It's all that's left.
I could hear the weight in her voice, the exhaustion. She had been fighting this war for years, and the toll it had taken on her was clear. But now, as we stood in the heart of the Resistance's hidden sanctuary, I realized just how dire the situation truly was.
They've been fighting the Reptilians for years. But the Reptilians have the upper hand. They have the technology, the weapons, the numbers, the green race. They've been holding on by a thread.
I frowned, my heart sinking as I looked at the weary faces of the villagers around us. They looked like they hadn't eaten in days, their bodies frail and emaciated from years of oppression. How could they possibly hope to fight against the Reptilians, let alone win? Lena stepped forward, her brow furrowed in concern.
Is this all of them?
Sarah shook her head.
No, there are more, scattered across the villages, hiding in the tunnels, waiting for their chance. But most of them are afraid. They've seen what happens when someone tries to resist. The Reptilians crush any sign of rebellion before it even begins.
I clenched my fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Then we need to give them hope. We need to show them that they can fight back. Sarah nodded, her eyes hardening with determination.
That's why we're here, the Stargate. It's our only chance.
Sarah, the Stargate only works one way. How did you use it to get us back here? Sarah's pacing stopped, and for a moment she didn't meet my eyes. The shadows under her eyes spoke of exhaustion and the burden of too many secrets. Finally, she let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging.
The Stargate does work both ways. The controllers can use it to travel anywhere in the realm, and they've shared that technology with the Reptilians. That's why the Reptilians are so obsessed with it. They think it's a gateway to other realms, other places of power. But it's more than that. It's the key to controlling movement within our world.
I blinked, my mind racing. You mean they've been using it all along? Why didn't they tell me? Sarah's expression darkened.
Because you, Ethan, are a problem to them. They know you opened the Stargate in the first place. They're afraid you'll figure out how it works, afraid you'll be able to use it in ways they can't predict or control.
The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. That was why they'd captured us. Not just because they wanted information about NASA or the Stargate, but because they feared what I could do with it.
They've been using the Stargate to move through the realm, controlling everything from behind the scenes. But the Reptilians still don't fully understand it. They think it's connected to some greater power, and that's where their obsession lies. If we can make them believe that you've figured out how to unlock its full potential, they'll panic, and that's when we strike.
I narrowed my eyes, skepticism creeping into my voice. You really think that'll work? That they'll believe I've figured out something they haven't?
They've underestimated you before. They're arrogant. They think they have everything under control, but you're an anomaly. You opened the Stargate once, and they know you could do it again, only this time on your terms.
I glanced at Lena, who was standing silently beside me, her expression thoughtful. She caught my eye and nodded slowly.
It's risky, but it might be the only chance we have.
Sarah stepped closer, her voice lowering to a whisper.
But there's more. The Reptilians aren't just watching us from the outside. They've been watching us from within. They have spies, shapeshifters, who've been blending in with the villages for years. We can't trust anyone until we're sure. We can't let them know what we're planning.
A cold chill ran down my spine. Shapeshifters. It made sense. We'd already seen the Reptilians' ability to manipulate reality, to twist memories and emotions. If they could infiltrate the resistance without us knowing, we wouldn't stand a chance. So how do we know who we can trust? I asked, my voice tight with anxiety. Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair.
We don't. That's the problem. But we need to be cautious. Careful about who we tell, how we move forward. The Reptilians are waiting for us to make a mistake, and they'll use it to crush us if we're not careful.
I clenched my fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The stakes had never been higher, and there was so much at risk, so many lives hanging in the balance. One wrong move, and everything would be lost. We'll need to use their obsession with the Stargate against them, I said finally, my voice steady. But we have to be smart. If we're going to win this, we need to stay 2 steps ahead of them. Sarah nodded, her face grim.
Agreed. But we can't wait long. The Reptilians will come looking for us, and they'll bring their full force when they do.
I turned to Lena, who was watching the conversation with quiet intensity.
You're right. This is our only shot.
Over the next few days, the tunnels beneath the village became a hive of activity. The green-skinned villagers, the last remnants of the resistance, began gathering supplies, sharpening weapons, and preparing for the coming battle. Word had spread quickly, and more villagers were slipping through the cracks, finding their way to the hidden tunnels beneath the city. The resistance was small and scattered, but it was growing. As the preparations ramped up, I found myself in a role I had never expected to take on: leader. It was strange. I'd always been a scientist, focused on research and discovery, not someone who led uprisings or fought wars. But now, as the resistance looked to me for guidance, I realized there was no turning back. They saw me as a symbol, a beacon of hope, someone who could help them turn the tide against the Reptilians. The responsibility weighed heavily on my shoulders, but I couldn't let them down. Lena was by my side every step of the way. She threw herself into the preparations, helping the villagers fortify their positions, building makeshift weapons, and coordinating supply runs. Her resourcefulness and quick thinking were keeping the resistance alive, and I couldn't have done any of this without her. Sarah, meanwhile, worked tirelessly with the resistance's few remaining leaders, helping them strategize and plan the attack. Her knowledge of the Reptilians' operations, gained during her years of working within their system, was invaluable. Despite the tension between us, I knew we needed her. Without her insights, we wouldn't stand a chance. The cavern beneath the village became a makeshift headquarters for the uprising. Villagers moved in and out of the tunnels, carrying weapons, supplies, and messages from the other scattered groups that had yet to join the fight. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. Everyone knew what was at stake. Everyone knew that if we failed, the Reptilians would wipe us out completely. There would be no second chances. One evening, as the sun set beyond the horizon and the cavern was illuminated by the warm glow of torches, I stood with Lena and Sarah near the entrance to the tunnels. The cool air filled my lungs, and the soft murmur of the villagers working echoed through the space. Lena broke the silence, her brow furrowed with concern.
Do you really think we can do this?
I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. I wanted to tell her we would win, that we would defeat the Reptilians and free the green race from their oppression. But I couldn't. The Reptilians were powerful, far more powerful than anything we had ever faced. Our chances of victory were slim, and we all knew it. But we didn't have a choice. We have to try, I said finally, my voice steady. We can't let them win. Lena nodded, her eyes filled with determination.
You're right, we have to.
Sarah stepped forward, her face set with grim resolve.
The Reptilians aren't invincible. They've made mistakes before. They underestimated the green race, and they've underestimated us. That's their weakness. And now we know, They've been controlling our region, Earth, from behind the scenes all along.
I glanced at her, surprised by the conviction in her voice. And you think we can exploit that? Sarah nodded.
Yes, we can. But we need to be smart. We need to strike at the right moment when they're vulnerable. The controllers may be using the Stargate to keep control of the realm, but they've put too much faith in the Reptilians. That's our advantage.
Lena folded her arms, her gaze distant.
And when will that be?
Sarah hesitated, her eyes flicking to the ground.
Soon, very soon, we need to be ready.
I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. The uprising was coming, whether we were ready or not, and the fate of the resistance of the entire green race rested on our shoulders. But as I looked around at the villagers, at their tired but determined faces, I knew one thing for sure. We weren't alone, and together we stood a chance. The cavern was quiet, except for the soft hum of energy pulsing through the air. A mix of the preparations for the impending battle and the tension that was thick enough to cut with a knife. I sat in the small, makeshift lab the Resistance had set up for me in a corner of the underground base, staring at the dissection table in front of me. The body of a reptilian lay before me, cold and still, its scales catching the faint glow of the torches lining the walls. The others were in the tunnels, gathering supplies and fortifying our defenses, but I couldn't stop thinking about the Reptilians, about how they worked, how they fought. Something about them had always felt off, something I hadn't been able to put my finger on until now. I'd never been a soldier. I was a scientist, trained to solve problems through logic and analysis, not to lead armies or fight wars. But now, I had no choice. If we were going to survive, if we were going to have any hope of defeating the Reptilians, I needed to find a way to fight them on their own terms. The reptilian corpse in front of me was one of the few we had managed to kill during our escape. Their bodies were tough, their reflexes sharp, and their ability to shape-shift had given them the upper hand in nearly every encounter. But I had a feeling that their power, this ability to change form, was also their greatest weakness. I just had to figure out how. Lena entered the lab quietly, carrying a tray of equipment we'd scavenged from one of the underground stores. Her eyes met mine, and she gave me a soft smile, though I could see the weariness etched across her face. We were all running on borrowed time, and every minute that passed brought us closer to the inevitable clash with the Reptilians.
You've been at this for hours.
She said, setting the tray down beside me.
Any luck?
I sighed, rubbing a hand across my forehead. Not yet, but there's something here. I can feel it. They're not invincible, Lena. There's a pattern to how they change, to how they manipulate their appearance. If I can figure out how their shape-shifting works, we might be able to exploit it. Lena nodded, pulling up a stool to sit beside me.
If anyone can figure it out, it's you.
Her faith in me was reassuring, but I couldn't shake the pressure that weighed down on my shoulders. The Resistance was counting on me, and failure wasn't an option. We had to find a way to reveal the reptilian spies among us before they tore us apart from the inside. I leaned over the body on the table, studying the intricate patterns of its scaly skin. The reptilian's body was humanoid, but there were clear differences, subtle variations in muscle structure, the density of their skin, and most importantly, the strange nodes I had found embedded beneath the surface of its throat. These nodes were the key. I was sure of it. I carefully inserted the tip of my scalpel into one of the nodes, peeling back the skin to reveal a cluster of delicate tissue and what looked like a small metallic implant nestled within. I frowned, leaning closer.
What is that?
Lena asked, her voice hushed. I'm not sure, I replied, squinting as I inspected the implant. It looks like some kind of biotechnology. It's fused with the organic tissue, but it doesn't belong here naturally. My guess is this implant is what allows them to shift their forms. Lena's brow furrowed.
You think they're using technology to shapeshift?
Partially, yes, I said, carefully removing the implant with a pair of tweezers. Their shape-shifting ability isn't purely biological. They use some kind of frequency to alter their appearance, and this implant is how they control it. I held up the small metallic device, turning it over in my hand. It was no bigger than a coin, but I could feel the faint hum of energy pulsing from within. If we can figure out the frequency they use, I continued, my mind racing, we might be able to disrupt it. We could reveal them for what they are, force them to drop their disguises. Lena's eyes widened.
That would change everything, if we could expose the shapeshifters hiding among us.
They wouldn't be able to hide anymore, I finished, a surge of excitement building in my chest. We could level the playing field. Lena nodded, her expression serious.
But how do we find the right frequency? We can't just guess.
I set the implant down and reached for a small handheld scanner, another piece of equipment we'd scavenged from the tunnels. I powered it on and ran it over the implant, watching as the screen lit up with a series of readings. We don't have to guess, I said, my eyes fixed on the data. If we can isolate the frequency from this implant, we can build a device to disrupt it. It's just a matter of time. Lena watched me work in silence for a few moments, then spoke softly.
You've really thought this through, haven't you?
I glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. I've had a lot of time to think. This is our best chance. She returned the smile, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes.
I just hope it's enough.
We fell into a comfortable silence as I continued to scan the implant, the data slowly coming together on the screen. The more I analyzed it, the more certain I became. The Reptilian's shape-shifting ability was controlled by a specific frequency, one that could be disrupted if we had the right technology. After a few more minutes, the scanner beeped, and the screen displayed the final result. There, I said, pointing to the frequency on the screen. That's it. That's what they use to change their forms. Lena leaned in, her eyes scanning the data.
So now what?
Now, I said, my mind racing, we build something to disrupt it. If we can create a device that emits this frequency, we can force them to reveal themselves. It won't hurt them, but it'll break their disguise. Lena's eyes widened, her excitement growing.
That would change everything. If we can expose the shapeshifters hiding in the resistance, we can stop them from sabotaging us.
I nodded, my heart pounding with the weight of the realization. This was it. This was the key to turning the tide of the battle. If we could reveal the reptilians hiding among us, we could eliminate the threat from within and focus on the larger fight ahead. But as the excitement coursed through me, a darker thought crept into my mind. If the reptilians had shapeshifters embedded in the resistance, how many of them were there? How long had they been hiding in plain sight, feeding information to their masters? Lena seemed to sense my unease.
What's wrong?
I looked up at her, my voice low. We need to be prepared. There could be more shapeshifters among us than we realize. If we expose them, we'll be putting a target on our backs. She nodded, her expression serious.
But we have no choice, right?
Right, I agreed. This is our only shot. We started hearing the frequency. It sounded like old bells, like the ones from ancient churches. This frequency sounds like those old bells, I told Lena.
Now we know why all those bells disappeared from Earth.
That's right. It explains why we could never uncover the reptilians or their true identities. 2 days later, we stood in the heart of the Resistance's main hideout, a large underground chamber lined with weapons, supplies, and makeshift beds. The air was thick with tension as the members of the Resistance gathered around, their green skin illuminated by the glow of the torches that lined the walls. Sarah stood next to me, her arms crossed, her face set with grim determination. Lena was beside her, her eyes scanning the crowd as we prepared for what was about to happen. I could feel the weight of the device in my hand, the small emitter we had built to disrupt the reptilians' shape-shifting frequency. If this works, I said quietly, we'll know exactly who we can trust. Sarah nodded.
And if it doesn't?
I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Then we're dead. Lena took a deep breath, her voice steady but laced with nerves.
Let's do it.
I stepped forward, the emitter in my hand, and raised my voice to address the crowd. We've all been through hell. We've lost friends, family, and nearly everything we've ever known. But we're not done fighting, not yet. The crowd murmured in agreement, their eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. But there's something we need to deal with first, I continued. There are reptilian spies among us, shapeshifters who have been hiding in plain sight, feeding information back to the enemy. Gasps rippled through the crowd, fear and suspicion flashing across their faces. I held up the emitter. This device will reveal them. It won't hurt anyone, but it'll force the shapeshifters to show their true form. The crowd was silent, their eyes fixed on the small device in my hand. We need to do this, I said, my voice firm. If we're going to survive, if we're going to win this fight, we need to know who's really on our side. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of every gaze on me. Then, slowly, one of the resistance members stepped forward, a young woman with wide, fearful eyes.
Do it. If there are spies among us, we need to know.
One by one, the others nodded in agreement, their faces pale but determined. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest, and activated the emitter. A low hum filled the air, and a wave of energy swept through the chamber. For a moment, nothing happened. The members of the resistance stood frozen, their eyes wide with fear. Then, suddenly, 4 figures began to shimmer, their forms flickering like static on a broken television. The crowd gasped as the illusion shattered, revealing the true forms of the reptilian shapeshifters among us. Their green, scaly skin gleamed in the torchlight, their yellow eyes wide with shock and fury. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. The resistance members closest to the reptilians lunged at them, weapons raised, while the shapeshifters fought back with brutal strength. The chamber descended into a frenzy of violence, the air thick with the sound of metal clashing and the cries of battle. Lena grabbed my arm, her voice urgent. We need to get out of here. I nodded, my heart racing. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back now. As we fought our way through the chaos, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed, that the battle for survival had just taken a dark, irreversible turn. We had unmasked the enemy, but in doing so, we had unleashed something far more dangerous. The war was no longer just about survival, it was about annihilation. The captured reptilians lay on the cold stone floor of the cavern, bound and gagged, their scaly forms glinting in the flickering torchlight. The resistance had never captured a reptilian alive before, and the air in the room crackled with the tense energy of this unprecedented moment. For so long, they had fought these shape-shifting creatures, suffering loss after loss. But now we had them. I stood at the edge of the room, watching as the resistance members carefully checked the restraints on the reptilians. Their yellow eyes darted around, filled with a mixture of rage and fear. They writhed against the ropes, hissing and snarling, but they weren't going anywhere. Sarah stood beside me, her expression hard as stone, while Lena busied herself with adjusting the small frequency emitter that we'd used to reveal the shapeshifters earlier. The discovery had been a game changer. This frequency could force them to show their true form, but with a higher intensity, it could do more. I approached the restrained reptilians, my mind racing with the possibilities. We were on the verge of something big, something that could shift the balance of power in this war.
Are we sure this will work?
Lena asked, glancing up at me from where she knelt beside the emitter. Her voice was calm, but I could see the tension in her eyes. I nodded slowly. We know that this frequency affects their ability to maintain their shape-shifting, but it's more than that. The implant I found in their bodies, it's not just for altering appearance. It's connected to their nervous system, controlling how they interact with the world around them. With the right intensity, we might be able to influence them. Sarah's brow furrowed as she studied the captured reptilians.
You mean mind control?
I met her gaze and nodded. That's exactly what I mean. They've been using it against us for years. It's time we turned the tables. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of my words settling over the gathered resistance fighters. Some of them looked uncertain, others eager to see their enemy suffer for once. We need answers, I continued, turning back to the reptilians. We need to know how the Stargate works, how they control it, how they move between realms. And if this frequency can help us get that information, then we have to use it. Lena stood up, the emitter now ready in her hands.
Let's find out.
I motioned for the others to step back as I crouched beside one of the restrained reptilians. The creature glared up at me, its reptilian pupils narrowing to slits, but it couldn't mask the fear in its eyes. Hold still, I said, my voice cold. This is going to hurt. I gave Lena a nod, and she activated the emitter. A low, vibrating hum filled the room, and the reptilian beneath me convulsed, its body jerking violently as the frequency intensified. It let out a choked, guttural cry, its muscles twitching as the sound waves resonated through its body. The other reptilians began to writhe as well, their bodies reacting to the frequency, but we held firm. We weren't going to let up until we had the information we needed. Turn it up, I ordered. Lena adjusted the emitter, and the intensity of the frequency increased. The reptilian beneath me screamed, its voice high-pitched and distorted, as though it were being torn apart from the inside. Its yellow eyes rolled back in its head, and for a moment I thought it might die from the pain. But then, slowly, it stopped resisting. I leaned closer, my voice low and steady. You know what we want. Tell us how the Stargate works, both ways. For a moment it was silent. The reptilian's chest heaved as it gasped for breath, but then, slowly, it began to speak. Its voice was hoarse, broken by the pain, but it was clear enough for us to understand. The Stargate is controlled by the controllers. It hissed, its body trembling. The reptilians. We use it to travel between the areas, but only with permission. I exchanged a glance with Lena. This was exactly what we needed to know. How? I pressed, my voice sharp. How do you use it? How can we control it? The reptilian's eyes flicked toward me, filled with hatred, but it was too weak to resist any longer. The Stargate is linked to the frequencies that control us, the controllers. They have the master key, but you have the device, the emitter. With it, you could disrupt the control, override the system. I felt my heart race as the realization hit me. The emitter we had built to expose their shape-shifting, it could do more than that. It could disrupt their entire control system. You're saying we can control the Stargate ourselves? I asked, my voice filled with disbelief. The reptilian nodded weakly. Yes, but only if you find the right frequency. You could take control of the gate. I stood up, my mind racing. This was it. This was the breakthrough we needed. We could control the Stargate. We could move between areas. And with that power, we could finally stand a chance against the reptilians and the controllers. Turn it off, I said quietly to Lena. She deactivated the emitter, and the room was suddenly filled with silence once more. The captured reptilians lay motionless, their bodies still trembling from the effects of the frequency. But it didn't matter. We had what we needed. The Resistance had never launched a direct attack on the reptilian cities before. They had always stayed in the shadows, striking from hidden locations, using guerrilla tactics to avoid being crushed by the overwhelming power of their enemies. But now everything had changed. We stood in the narrow tunnels beneath the Reptilian city, the air thick with tension as the resistance fighters prepared for their first true battle. The frequency weapons we had built, small, portable emitters that could disrupt the Reptilians' shape-shifting abilities, were strapped to the belts of every fighter. This was our trump card. This was how we would win. Sarah stood beside me, her face set with determination. Lena was on my other side, her eyes scanning the darkness ahead, ready for the fight that was about to begin. "We've never done anything like this before," Lena whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know, but we're ready. We have the weapons, and we have the element of surprise." Sarah glanced at me, her voice steady.
The Reptilians aren't expecting us to attack their city. They think we're too weak, too disorganized. But they don't know what we've learned.
I tightened my grip on my own frequency emitter. "We'll show them." We moved forward, the sound of our footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath us. The tunnel led directly into the heart of the Reptilian city, a sprawling high-tech metropolis that had stood untouched for centuries. The Reptilians had ruled this land with an iron fist, crushing any resistance that dared to rise against them. But now, for the first time, we were fighting back. As we reached the edge of the tunnel, I signaled for the others to stop. The entrance to the city was just ahead, a wide metal door that led into the sprawling underground complex where the Reptilians lived and worked. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was about to happen. "Ready?" I whispered. Lena nodded.
Ready.
Sarah gave me a determined look.
Let's do this.
I activated the frequency emitter, and the low hum filled the air. The sound reverberated through the walls of the tunnel, and I could feel the power of it vibrating in my bones. "Go," I ordered. The metal door slid open, and we rushed into the city. The Reptilians were caught completely off guard. They hadn't expected us to bring the fight to their doorstep, and as we poured into the city, the resistance fighters unleashed their frequency weapons. The Reptilians' shape-shifting abilities were immediately disrupted, their bodies flickering and convulsing as the emitters broke through their defenses. For the first time, the resistance wasn't running. We were fighting, and we were winning. Lena moved beside me, her frequency emitter blazing as she fought off a group of Reptilian soldiers. Sarah was on the other side of the street, leading another group of fighters as they pushed deeper into the city. The battle was chaotic, the air filled with the sounds of gunfire, screams, and the hum of the frequency weapons. But for the first time, the green-skinned villagers, the resistance, were holding their ground. I watched as the Reptilians fell back, their forces crumbling under the onslaught of the frequency weapons. For so long, they had relied on their ability to shift forms, to manipulate and control. But now that power had been taken from them, they were vulnerable, exposed. And we were taking full advantage of it. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, the resistance pushing deeper into the city, overwhelming the Reptilian forces with every step. For the first time, I saw hope in the eyes of the fighters around me, hope that we could win, that we could take back what had been stolen from us. Finally, as the sun began to set beyond the horizon, the last of the Reptilian soldiers fell. The city was ours. The resistance had won its first battle. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. We stood in the heart of the Reptilian city, its towering buildings casting long shadows across the streets. The green-skinned villagers, once downtrodden and fearful, were now surging forward, their eyes blazing with newfound hope. For the first time in centuries, they had taken something back from their oppressors. They had won a battle, and the victory had ignited a fire in their hearts that would not be easily extinguished. The Reptilian forces had fallen back, retreating into the shadows, leaving their once impenetrable city vulnerable. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and scorched earth, and the distant sound of small skirmishes echoed through the streets. But for the most part, the city was ours. Lena stood beside me, her chest heaving with exhaustion, but her eyes alight with victory. She wiped the sweat from her brow, a triumphant smile tugging at the corners of her lips.
We did it.
She breathed, her voice filled with disbelief. I nodded, still trying to wrap my mind around the fact that we had won. The frequency weapons had worked. The Reptilians' shape-shifting abilities had been stripped away, leaving them vulnerable for the first time in centuries, and we had taken full advantage of it. But even as the Resistance celebrated their victory, I couldn't shake the nagging thought at the back of my mind. This was just the beginning. The Reptilians were powerful, and their defeat here, while significant, was only a small step in a much larger war. We had won the battle, but the war against the controllers, the true rulers of this realm, was far from over. I glanced at Sarah, who was standing a few feet away, talking quietly with a group of resistance leaders. Her face was grim, her expression hard. She had been instrumental in helping us win this battle, but I could see the weight of everything we had learned bearing down on her. The Stargate, the key to everything. For so long, the Reptilians had guarded the secrets of the Stargate, using it to move between realms, controlling the flow of power across the boundaries of our world. But now we had the knowledge and the technology to use it for ourselves. The frequency emitters we had built, the small devices we had used to expose the Reptilians' shape-shifting abilities, were more powerful than we had realized. With the right adjustments, we could control the Stargate. We could move between realms, just as the Reptilians and the controllers had done for centuries. But the question remained, what would we do with that power? As if sensing my thoughts, Lena stepped closer, her voice low.
You're thinking about the Stargate, aren't you?
I nodded, my gaze drifting toward the distant horizon. Yeah, we have the knowledge now. We could use it.
And go back to our Earth.
She said softly. The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Earth, home. For so long we had been trapped in this alien realm, fighting for survival, trying to understand the rules of this strange, fragmented world. But now we had the means to return, to go back to Area 51, back to our own people, but it wasn't that simple. Nothing ever was. I can rebuild the device, I said quietly, my mind already racing with the possibilities. I know how it works now. We can use the frequency to control the Stargate, open it from both sides. Lena's eyes widened, a spark of hope flickering in their depths.
You can really do it?
I can, I replied. It'll take time, a few days at least, but I can build the device. Her face softened, a mixture of relief and apprehension crossing her features.
We could go home.
I nodded, the thought filling me with a strange mix of excitement and dread. Yeah, we could. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt the weight of the decision settling over me. Going home meant leaving behind everything we had fought for here. It meant abandoning the resistance, abandoning the green-skinned villagers who had risked everything to fight back against the Reptilians. I glanced over at Sarah, who was still deep in conversation with the resistance leaders. She had been here for years, fighting, surviving, waiting for a chance to make a difference. And now, she had found it. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. While the resistance continued to secure their hold on the city, I locked myself away in a small workshop, surrounded by parts and tools scavenged from the Reptilian technology. The frequency emitter sat in front of me on the workbench, its sleek, metallic surface gleaming under the harsh light of the overhead lamps. I had dismantled the original emitter we had used to disrupt the Reptilians' shape-shifting abilities, studying every component, every wire, every circuit. It was a marvel of technology, a blend of organic and mechanical systems that worked in perfect harmony. And now, with the knowledge we had gained from the captured Reptilian, I was ready to take it a step further. The Stargate was powered by frequencies, specific sound waves that interacted with the fabric of space and time, allowing the reptilians and controllers to move between realms. The device I was building would allow us to control those frequencies, to override the system and open the Stargate from both sides. It was delicate work, and every moment was filled with the tension of knowing that a single mistake could mean failure. But failure wasn't an option, not this time. Lena was a constant presence at my side, helping me when she could, but mostly offering quiet support. She knew how important this was, not just for us, but for the future of the Resistance. The device wasn't just a way for us to return home. It was a weapon, a tool that could turn the tide of the war. On the third day, as I was adjusting the final settings on the emitter, Sarah entered the workshop. She looked tired, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but there was a steely determination in her gaze.
Is it ready?
I nodded, holding up the device. It's ready. She exhaled softly, her eyes flicking to the emitter in my hands.
So we're really going back?
I nodded, though there was an uncertainty in my heart. That's the plan. We've done what we can here. It's time to return to Earth, to Area 51, and find a way to bring reinforcements. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked away, her eyes clouded with something I couldn't quite place.
And you really think that's the best idea?
I frowned, confusion flickering across my face. Of course it is. We can get help from Earth. We have the technology now. With this, the Resistance will be able to fight back. Sarah was silent for a long moment, and then she looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't expected to see.
I'm not going with you.
The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment I just stared at her, trying to process what she had said. What?
I'm staying. I've been fighting this war for years, Ethan. I can't leave now, not when we're finally starting to make progress.
I blinked, my mind racing. This wasn't what I had expected. I had thought that Sarah, after everything she had been through, would want to come back to Earth with us, that she would want to escape this place, leave the war behind. But as I looked at her, standing there with that hard, determined look in her eyes, I realized I had been wrong. "You're staying?" I repeated, my voice tinged with disbelief. "But, Sarah, we're going back to Earth. We can get help. We can end this." She shook her head slowly.
I know. And that's why I need to stay. The Green Race, they need me. We've fought too hard, come too far to abandon them now. I've spent years fighting for these people, trying to give them a chance at freedom. I can't leave them.
I felt my heart sink as the weight of her words settled over me. I had thought that the battle we had just won would be the end of it, that we would return to Earth and find a way to put this all behind us. But for Sarah, this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Lena, who had been standing silently beside me, stepped forward, her voice soft.
You're sure about this, Sarah?
I'm sure. This is where I belong now. This is my fight.
For a moment, none of us spoke. The air in the workshop was thick with the tension of everything that had been left unsaid. Finally, I stepped forward, holding out the device I had built. "Then take this. You'll need it." She looked down at the device in my hand, her eyes flicking between me and it.
What is it?
It's the same device we're using to control the Stargate. With this, you'll be able to open it from either side. If things get too dangerous, if you ever need to leave, you'll have a way out. Sarah's eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of gratitude cross her face. She reached out, taking the device from my hand, her fingers brushing mine.
Thank you.
I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "You've earned it. You've done more than anyone could have asked." She gave me a small, sad smile.
So have you.
The moment had finally come. After days of preparation, after months of fighting for survival, we were standing before the Stargate once again. The massive structure loomed over us, its surface shimmering like liquid metal, rippling with energy as the frequency emitters hummed to life. Lena stood beside me, her face pale but determined. We had made our choice. We were going back to Earth, back to Area 51, back to the life we had left behind. But as I activated the device, as the Stargate flared to life, and the swirling portal opened before us, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. We had won a battle here, but the war was far from over. The controllers were still out there, watching, waiting, and the Reptilians would regroup. They always did.
We're really doing this.
I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. Yeah, we're doing it. I turned to Sarah one last time. She stood at the edge of the platform, watching us with a quiet intensity. She gave me a small nod, and I returned it.
Good luck?
She called out over the hum of the Stargate. You too, I replied. And with that, Lena and I stepped through the portal, the world around us dissolving into a swirl of light and sound. We were going home. The swirling energy of the Stargate enveloped us, pulling Lena and me through the shimmering portal. The disorienting sensation of being stretched, twisted, and hurtled through space washed over us, making my heart race. But amidst the chaos, one thought kept me grounded. We were finally going home. After everything we had been through, fighting the Reptilians, helping the green race, unlocking the secrets of the Stargate, finally, we were going back. Earth, Area 51. We had made it. The blinding light and swirling energy surrounding us faded as quickly as it had appeared. We stumbled forward, the cold, familiar air of the Nevada desert filling my lungs as I hit solid ground. My knees buckled slightly from the transition, but I quickly regained my balance. The arid landscape of Area 51 stretched out before us, with its endless plains of rocky terrain and dry scrub. It was the same secretive base we had left behind, hidden behind military security and a veil of conspiracy. But now, after everything we'd seen, Area 51 felt small, insignificant. The desert wind blew, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and a sense of eerie stillness. Lena steadied herself beside me, breathing heavily as she gazed at the familiar surroundings. Her face was pale, a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief.
We're back. We actually made it.
I nodded, feeling the weight of our journey settle over me. We had escaped Area 52, helped the resistance, and now returned with knowledge and power that could change everything. The frequency weapons strapped to our belts were proof of that. More than just devices, they were our only hope of revealing the truth. But something was wrong. Even as the familiar landscape stretched out before us, I felt a knot of tension growing in my chest, a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Lena's hand gripped my arm.
Ethan, do you hear that?
The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My senses sharpened as I listened, and then I heard it, faint but growing louder. Footsteps, swift, heavy, and unnatural. I turned sharply, and my heart dropped. Emerging from the horizon, silhouetted against the harsh desert sun, were dark figures, reptilians. Sleek, armored, and fast, their cold, calculating eyes locked onto us. They were coming for us, and they weren't alone. There were several of them, moving with deadly precision, like predators closing in on prey. They know, I muttered under my breath, horror settling in. Lena's eyes widened in panic.
How? How could they know we're back already?
I didn't need to answer her. The truth was obvious. The controllers had been watching us, tracking us from the moment we set foot in Area 52. They knew everything. And now, they had sent their enforcers to eliminate us before we could expose the truth. We were a threat they couldn't afford to let live. "We need to run," I shouted, grabbing Lena's hand and pulling her with me as we turned and sprinted across the rocky desert. The reptilians were fast, too fast. Their footsteps pounded behind us, kicking up dust as they pursued us with relentless speed. My heart raced as the weight of our situation pressed down on me. The frequency weapons on our belts were our only advantage, but they wouldn't stop the reptilians for long. We needed a way out, fast. We fired at them with the frequency weapons, but it wasn't enough. There were too many of them. It was only a matter of time before we got caught.
They're gaining on us. Ethan, what do we do?
I looked around frantically, but the barren desert offered no cover. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. The reptilians were closing in, their cold reptilian eyes glowing with cruel intent. The knot of fear in my chest tightened. We couldn't outrun them forever, and we couldn't go back to Area 52. The resistance wouldn't stand a chance if we led the reptilians and controllers there. The green race was barely surviving as it was. If the reptilians found them, it would be a slaughter. My hand instinctively went to the frequency device at my belt. An idea sparked in my mind, dangerous, desperate, but it was our only chance. "Hold on!" I shouted, pulling the device free from my belt.
What are you doing?
Lena asked, panic rising in her voice as we continued to run. "I'm going to open another portal," I replied, my fingers trembling as I adjusted the settings on the device. "I don't know where it'll take us, but anywhere is better than here." I quickly recalibrated the frequency, pushing the device to its limits. The air around us shimmered, rippling with energy as I focused on opening a new portal. Behind us, the reptilians were getting closer, their hissing growls filling the air, their claws outstretched. Come on," I muttered under my breath, willing the portal to open. And then, just as the reptilians were about to reach us, the air split open. A shimmering vortex of light and energy erupted before us, its surface rippling like liquid glass. Without hesitation, I grabbed Lena's hand and leaped into the portal, the furious hisses of the reptilians fading as the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of light and sound. We tumbled out of the portal and landed hard on the ground. I gasped as the wind was knocked out of me, the shock of impact rattling my bones. My vision blurred for a moment, and I struggled to regain my bearings. The air here was different, dense, thick, with an odd metallic taste on my tongue. I blinked, forcing my eyes to focus, and when they did, I froze in stunned silence. We were no longer in the desert. In fact, we were no longer anywhere remotely familiar. The world around us was like nothing I had ever seen before. The sky was a deep, shimmering silver, with swirling clouds that moved unnaturally fast, as if time itself was distorted. The ground beneath us was a smooth, reflective surface, like glass, but with a strange iridescent sheen that shifted and glimmered as we moved. It stretched out infinitely in every direction, creating the unsettling illusion that we were standing on the surface of a massive, endless mirror. In the distance, massive, towering structures loomed, dark, angular shapes that pierced the sky like jagged monoliths. They weren't buildings, at least not in any sense that I could recognize. They were more like abstract geometric forms, floating above the ground, their surfaces pulsing with a faint glowing energy. Lena slowly got to her feet beside me, her eyes wide with disbelief.
What is this place?
"I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "but it's definitely not Earth." We stood in silence for a moment, taking in the surreal, otherworldly landscape. There was no sound, no wind, no life. Just the strange, shimmering surface beneath us and the distant, eerie hum of the floating structures. It was like we had stepped into a world beyond time and space, a place that defied logic and reason. Suddenly, a shadow passed overhead, and I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. A massive creature soared above us, its silhouette dark against the silvery sky. At first, I thought it was some kind of bird, but as it circled lower, the sheer size of it became apparent. It wasn't a bird. It was a dragon. The creature's enormous wings beat the air with a force that made the ground beneath us tremble. Its scales shimmered like polished steel, and its long serpentine body coiled through the sky with a terrifying grace. Its eyes, glowing with an intense fiery light, locked onto us, and I saw the flicker of flames gathering in its open maw.
Ethan, that's not a bird, is it?
No, I whispered, dread rising in my chest. It's a dragon. The dragon let out a deafening roar, the sound reverberating through the strange mirrored landscape. Its massive jaws opened wide, and a torrent of fire erupted from its mouth, scorching the air as it hurtled toward us. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Lena's hand and pulling her with me as we sprinted across the mirrored ground. The dragon's fire roared behind us, scorching the surface, sending waves of heat crashing into us. My heart pounded as we dodged between the towering structures, searching for any form of shelter. But there was none. The landscape stretched out endlessly with no cover, no safety. The dragon swooped low, its massive wings casting a shadow over us as it prepared to strike again. I glanced back, and my breath caught in my throat. The dragon was gaining on us, its eyes burning with fiery rage, its claws outstretched. There was no time to think, no time to plan. We were out of options. As the dragon's roar echoed through the strange, silent world, I tightened my grip on Lena's hand, praying that we would find a way out of this nightmare before it was too late. So I shouted to Lena like I never had before, "Run, Lena, run, and never look back."